When I was 14 years old, I lived with my mom, dad, 2 brothers, and my sister in a rural town in Florida. Overall, I miss living in Florida, but the one thing I don't miss was the constant rain. On one particular stormy Saturday night, where the thunder was so loud it shook the whole house, me and my 2 brothers had nothing to do. My sister was out at a friend's house. Me and my 2 brothers decided to play some video games to pass the time. It was only 8 o'clock after all. I remember we were playing some weird PS2 game where all the WWE wrestlers were driving cars and shooting at each other. I don't remember the name, but I remember the exact moment the power went out. I was about to kill my brother in the game when the room went completely dark and the sound of something popping from outside echoed into the room. We assumed a fuse had blown outside on one of the power lines. We went to call for our dad, who was already getting his rain jacket on to go outside and check. Our house has 2 fuse boxes, one outside attached to the telephone pole on our lawn, and one inside. He asked me to go outside with him to aim a flashlight at the fuse box. When we were outside, he opened up the fuse box and began flicking around the different switches, hoping to reset something. He tried every switch, but the power didn't seem to come back on. He told me to wait there and to keep flicking switches while he went inside to do the same thing with the indoor fuse box. The rain was coming down hard. I just wanted to go inside as soon as possible. As I had the flashlight in my hand aimed into the fuse box, even through the sound of rain pounding down on the ground, I thought I heard something come from the woods behind our house, like a giant log cracking. I aimed the flashlight into the woods, and for maybe half a second, I thought I saw an arm reaching around from behind a tree. But as soon as the light exposed it, the arm pulled away behind the tree. I shut the fuse box, ran up the front patio and into the house. I ran to my dad, who was tampering with the switches inside the fuse box in the closet. He entertained my claim, but he didn't seem to take what I said very seriously. He followed me outside around back, where I aimed the flashlight into the woods, the same spot I saw the arm. My dad took the flashlight from me and made his way into the woods. I stayed by the back patio in total darkness. Pretty soon my dad went so deep into the woods that I couldn't see the flashlight anymore. Growing nervous, I inched my way closer to the woods, repeatedly calling out for my dad, until I found myself walking into the woods. It was hard to even hear myself think over the sound of rain pouring down on the leaves above, but I did suddenly hear footsteps not too far away. Once again, I called out for my dad, and I heard him answer. This made me panic. Why, you may be wondering? Because my dad's voice came from a completely different direction than the footsteps. I ran in the direction of my dad's voice and eventually found him walking back to the house. Out of breath, I barely managed to tell him about the footsteps over in the other direction. He told me to go back inside and he'll continue to look around, and so I went inside and locked the door. Me, my brothers, and my mom all waited by the back door, expecting to see him come out of the woods any second. Eventually, we heard someone at the front door trying to open the locked door. I went over, expecting it to be my dad, but my mom stopped me and looked through the peephole. Then she screamed. She ushered me away from the door and told all of us to go upstairs, and at that same moment, my dad came back into the house through the back door. I didn't see the rest of what happened, but I heard my dad yelling at someone outside. When he came back in, he told all of us he saw someone running into the woods. I knew he was taking this seriously now. We thought it would end there, but the next morning, we found that the basement window had been smashed, and there were muddy footprints all over the basement carpet. A large wad of cash that was sitting on the basement bar was stolen, along with a few antique decorations that held some value. The scary part was that the muddy footsteps went up the stairs, but stopped there. Our basement door had a very heavy-duty lock, which may be the only thing that stopped this man from exploring the rest of our house, possibly even our bedrooms. It's been a pretty rough couple of nights over here in Midwest. Flood warnings are replaced with thunderstorm watches. Thunderstorm watches are followed up by tornado warnings, and even sirens add a nice touch to this surreal nightly experience. I used to enjoy a good thunderstorm. You get yourself comfortable on a couch, grab an extra pillow with a blanket, cuddle up, and enjoy the show of grace and might. Lightning bolts ripping through the sky, illuminating clouds, houses, and tree lines. The sound wave, coming with a tad of delay, shaking the window frames and sending a strange tingle through your body. Nature is a powerful force, and it was majestic to see it in action. Until tonight. The forecast was promising a late-night thunderstorm, so I was caught by surprise when I started seeing flashes outside around midnight. Since I wasn't prepared for it, I tried to quickly finish up the Orange is the New Black episode and get myself to the couch. When I got my headphones off, I realized why the flashes seemed so odd at first. There was no sound to follow them. I mean, if the lightning is in the clouds or pretty far away, then yeah, I guess the sound could be missing. But the flashes seemed so close. I decided to check out the sky of the kitchen window. There's a pair of large glass panels that give you a good, wide-angle view to the outside. To keep my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I stayed away from flipping the switches on and traveled through the house relying on my memory. The moonless darkness of outside gives you that eerie feeling, even if you are inside of the safe walls of your house. But those are just the feelings, nothing else. If it wasn't for the glass, the pitch-black darkness of both sides made me feel like the safe walls surrounding me no longer exist, and that feel of safety was slowly crawling away. But the walls did shatter when I glanced up high into the sky, and my eyes met the twinkly stars staring back at me. There were no clouds. There was no thunderstorm with lightning. No, there wasn't. But the next flash, right from the other side of the window pane, did reveal that there was someone 5 feet away from me, and nothing but a thin glass sheet was separating us apart. In the year 2009, I was spending a weekend with my uncle on his ranch when my parents were renovating the new house we had just bought. It was my second night there, a Saturday, and it happened to be during one of the biggest thunderstorms of the year. I'd say there were at least 3 crashes of thunder and lightning per minute. And we were in the heart of the storm, because the thunder would crash not even a second after the lightning would. I always enjoyed listening to storms while laying in bed. So I stayed up a little later watching TV, just enjoying the ambiance. After the movie I was watching finally ended, I turned off the TV and tried to fall asleep. As I heard the lightning strike from outside, I could have sworn I heard some kind of metallic thud coming from outside at the same time. I didn't pay it too much mind. 20 seconds later, I could have sworn I heard it again. A very distinct metallic thud coming from outside to match the timing of the lightning. I really don't mean to make this sound like a cliche horror story, but my uncle really is a kind of creepy guy, and I was never close with him even remotely, so for that reason I didn't feel right going to wake him up. I just tried to forget about it. Now I was getting concerned. What the hell could that be? After the 3rd time, I finally got out of bed and walked over to the window of the guest bedroom. The water pouring down on the window made it extra hard to see what was out there in the dark fields. A flash of lightning momentarily lit up the property, but I couldn't see anything. However, once again, the sound of a metal hit accompanied it. The sound was so close now, it sounded like it was coming from the left of the window at a blind spot. I was going to do something I knew my uncle wouldn't be happy about. It would be a bit messy, but I was going to open the window and peer outside to see if I could see what the sound was. I unhooked the window lock and slid it up, and immediately the wind of the storm blew drops of rain into the room and onto me. I stuck my head out the window and looked to the left, and at that very moment, lightning lit up the property once again, and I could see a person dressed in all black crouched down by the outside basement door with his hand raised in the air. And before the sky went dark, I caught the briefest glimpse of what the sound was coming from. The person was bashing at the basement door lock. I pulled my head in and quietly shut the window, making sure to lock it. I was in a panic. I feared he might have seen or heard me. I ran back to bed and pretended to be asleep, facing away from the window. Lightning crashed once again, but this time there was no metallic thud. My heart must have dropped as I realized this. I just stayed put in bed for the longest time, hoping whoever was out there would go away. After maybe 3 more lightning crashes without any thuds accompanying them, I thought it would be safe to go tell my uncle. I turned to face the window and screamed. There was a figure, clear as day, standing at the window, looking in at me. I screamed as loud as I could and ran straight to my uncle's room. He went outside with his hunting rifle with nothing on but his pajamas, not even socks. He ran around the entire property yelling like a madman, but didn't find anyone. The next morning, we were able to better see the marks on the basement door lock. It was almost bashed open. Maybe 3 or 4 more good hits would have done it, according to my uncle. He was proud of me for picking up on it. Luckily, I was out of there that same day. My uncle hasn't told us of any incidents since, so I think he's been okay. Not that we talked to him much at all. I'm grateful I stayed up a little later that night watching that movie, because I may have just stopped a robbery, or possibly much worse. I used to play a lot of hide and seek with my friends when we were young. A team version of the game though, so it was a little different. Instead of having a lone seeker who tags anybody, we would have a team of seekers and a team of hiders. And for the hiders to win, they would have to get to a certain checkpoint, and seekers would win if they tagged all the hiders. To tag one of the hiders, the seeker would have to two-hand touch their back, just like touch football. It started when we all formed our group on the block around 8 years old, all the way up until we were about 13. I lived in a cul-de-sac where there were 3 other houses besides mine, and kids my age lived in each one. There were also 4 other kids right outside the cul-de-sac around our age, so ever since I was little I had a group of neighboring friends. When we would play hide and seek, we would usually play in the cul-de-sac, since there was a lot of open space, trees, bushes, and each of the houses belonged to one of us, so we could use all the property space for the game as well. Plus, the cul-de-sac was right in front of our town's nature preserve park, so it also made it more fun to have the woods as an added hiding spot. It was 2008. I was 11 years old, a time and age we would still play hide and seek on Friday nights instead of going out to flirt with girls. We had only 6 of us this night, so we divided our 2 teams into 3s and split up. We were first to hide. The other team began counting down from 30, while we all went our separate ways to different houses. I ran to my next door neighbor's house and came up with a really creative idea. My friend had a green blanket outside on his patio sitting under a couple flower pots. I carefully moved the flower pots and took the green blanket, folding it over my body and crawling over to the bushes near the edge of the woods. Since our houses met the edge of the nature preserve, we could all choose if we wanted a back fence or not, and my next door neighbors chose not to have one, meaning the woods connected to some of our backyards. I heard the backyard gate open, so I quickly ran into the woods and knelt down under the green blanket. I would occasionally lift the blanket over my head to see who was there, and eventually I saw one of my friends creeping around the backyard, checking under the table and such. So while they were distracted, I waddled on my knees to the backyard of the next house over, where I could hear the commotion of one of my teammates getting caught. I lifted the blanket over my head to see what was going on, and I saw someone on the other team escorting my teammate back outside to the street. This was the perfect opportunity for me to run for it. I dropped the blanket completely and just looked around one last time before getting ready to make a break for it. Then, the most unexpected happened. The sound of a shoe on freshly fallen leaves and twigs snapped from right behind my ears, and before I could even turn around, I felt 2 hands grab my shoulders with a very strong and tight grip. I squealed in pain for a bit and screamed stop, managing to escape the grip and run for the checkpoint. I didn't make it to the checkpoint anyway though, because I ran into one of the seekers right at the backyard gates. We went out to the street where I found out that both of my teammates were already out, and the 2 other seekers were already waiting by the street. "Wait," I said. "If all of you guys are already out here, who was the one who found me in the woods?" I asked. They all looked at each other, seemingly confused. None of them owned up to it. They all swore they hadn't even gone into the woods. As I realized they were telling the truth, I felt my heart skip a few beats before pumping back up in a rapid beat, twice as fast as normal. When I told them that somebody was in the woods and grabbed me with force, they didn't believe me at first, but I convinced them. We all went to tell our parents, and the cops were called. Unfortunately for my neighbor friend, his parents put up a fourth fence wall, separating the woods to the backyard. We continued to play hide and seek and flashlight tag past this incident up until around the age of 13. Our parents just made us carry flashlights from now on and left all the backyard lights on. And of course, the woods were off limits. I'm happy to have such fond memories with friends as a young child, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that this was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. This happened when I was 10 years old. I lived in a small town in New York State that didn't have much going on at all. The house next door to mine was vacant for the longest time, until one day a moving truck pulled up in front, and a woman, a kid my age, and a toddler stepped out. Me and my dad had been sitting on the stoop talking, so we were able to go over and greet them right away. The mom seemed pretty normal, though there was something slightly off about her personality. My dad and the mom introduced me and the other boy my age to each other. He introduced himself as CJ, and then reached out his hand for a handshake, which for kids our age at the time was very weird. I shook his hand, and I remember both of our parents laughed. My dad ended up pressuring me on the spot to go hang out with CJ upstairs in my room. I wasn't against it, so I led him up to my room. I sat down on my bed, and he just stared at me blankly, creepily. I asked him if he wanted to play Mario Kart, and he didn't even know what that was. I showed him a few of my video games, and he said he doesn't like video games, so I suggested we play hide and seek outside. That he agreed to. I told him he could hide first to familiarize himself with the properties, while I gave him a 60-second head start. He ran into his new backyard, and I started counting down from 60. When it came time to find him, I found him in literally the most obvious place he could be. He was standing behind the chimney, a spot that I had to pass to get into the backyard. From this point on, I was starting to wonder if maybe this kid wasn't all there. After 10 minutes of an anticlimactic game of hide and seek, I said I had homework to do. He asked if he could come inside with me, and I didn't know what to say. Every excuse I came up with, he would find another way of asking to come inside. Eventually, however, he did leave me alone, and I went inside. Realistically, I had nothing to do. I just didn't like the kid and didn't want to further any kind of friendship with him. That night, something terrifying happened. I awoke to a thud at my bedside window. I sat up and lifted the window up. I was disturbed to see CJ's face at the upstairs window of the neighboring house. He leaned out his window and called out for me to come over and play hide and seek. I yelled over he's insane and told him to go back to sleep and leave me alone. I aggressively slammed my window shut, as well as the blind, and tried to go back to sleep. Two more times a rock or something was thrown at my window, but I ignored it. When it seemed to stop, I was relieved, and finally felt at ease. 10 minutes or so later, I heard a noise coming from below my window outside. It sounded like a bird was hopping around the ledge or something, possibly. The sound kept getting closer though, and then I heard a thud come from right below my window. I didn't know what to think. What if CJ was out there? Was he trying to climb up to my window? The thought of it was so disturbing it was almost comical. Then I heard the slightest creak of the floorboards near my bedroom door. I turned to face the doorway and screamed at the sight of CJ standing at my door in his pajamas. He said in a quiet voice, "Let's play hide and seek." My dad was in the room quicker than I could even get out of my bed. He was just as shocked and disturbed as I was. He angrily marched over to the new neighbor's house with CJ in his grip. I watched the whole thing through my window. He raised his voice quite a few times. It turned out CJ simply entered through an unlocked window downstairs. My dad got a restraining order against the woman and her son. Unfortunately, they weren't going anywhere though. For months after this incident, I would have to awkwardly avoid eye contact with the mother next door the few times I saw her. Strangely, I never once saw CJ outside of the house again. However, every single night for over a month, I would check outside my bedroom window across to the other house and see CJ just sitting by his window looking into mine with his creepy blank stare. It got to a point where I eventually left the blinds to that window closed 24/7, and eventually it stopped. CJ and his mom moved out less than a year later, and luckily I never saw them again. After moving to the dorms for college, I started drinking a lot more than I did in high school. It changed me. During winter break, I came back home to my parents' house to spend the holidays with my family. New Year's was just becoming a holiday that I looked forward to, since it entailed a lot of partying with other people my age. It was New Year's Eve night. My parents were out at a friend's party. I had my two best friends over. I'll call them Jim and Steve. That was really our hometown squad back then. We didn't have that many other friends that liked to go out. I had them over to drink and hang out while we figured out our plans for the night. Jim apparently was talking to this girl who invited him to a party across town. She told him that we could come too, so that was our plan. We downed a few shots of rum, then polished off a few cans of beer each, and we each were pretty drunk. Jim called an Uber to the address the girl gave him, and we all split it 3 ways. Jim said he never met this girl, but that they matched on Tinder a week ago, and that she was really pretty and seemed cool based on her texting style. The Uber driver pulled us up in front of some storage-looking building. This was apparently the address. We were confused. Jim read the address over, and we all confirmed on our phones that this building was what came up under the address. Before allowing the Uber driver to leave, Jim confirmed with the girl he was talking to that it was in fact this building and not a house. Almost instantly, she texted back confirming this. So we all got out from the Uber, and then he slowly disappeared down the street. We made jokes about not really wanting to go in and calling the Uber to come back, but ultimately we ended up just going in. We looked for an entryway, and it seemed there was a small door left open with a big guy standing by it. We approached him and asked if this was the party. He nodded his head and pointed in the doorway without saying a word. Pretty sketchy. We walked into this very dark, narrow hallway, following a lone ceiling light hanging at the end of the hall. We were getting closer to the sound of the loud, rumbling music. We got to the end of the hall and found the opening to, I guess, what was supposed to be the party floor. It wasn't nearly as big on the inside as the outside. It was very dark, the only lighting being from a couple cheap-looking strobe light machines. There wasn't a huge crowd, maybe 20 to 30 people sprawled out throughout the area. No one was really dancing either. Everyone was kind of standing in their own little circles. A lot of people were just sitting in chairs by themselves, kind of eyeing us down. The weirdest and most off-putting thing of all, though, we didn't see any females. The music was very loud and hard to talk over, so we moved to a corner further from the speakers and the crowds. I yelled at Jim to call that girl and ask her where she is. She texted back saying she's in the back section, just beyond the double doors. She told us to meet her there. This didn't sound right, and I told Jim that. He said we'd just take a peek back there and leave if she's not there. Jim led the way, following the directions from this girl. We went through these 2 doors held open by door stoppers into this dimly lit narrow hall with a bunch of doors. As we walked, someone quickly appeared from one of the rooms and whispered something in Jim's ear. Jim kept saying what, looking very confused. Then he turned to us and waved his hand saying, "Let's just get out of here." We didn't question it. As we walked back through that little main dance hall, I could tell we were getting looked at again. Some big guy at one of the doors tried stopping us for whatever reason. We just walked through him back down the hall we came through. We noticed he was following us, and finally Jim yelled "run" and started sprinting down the hall. That's when I knew shit was real. We followed, and the guy behind us yelled at the top of his lungs, "Yo, stop them," probably to the guy standing at the entry door. He didn't really make an effort to stop us though when we ran back out the front door. We ran out of the little parking lot into the closest main road, where we called an Uber again. Jim explained that the dude in the hall whispered in his ear to get out of there before midnight, as they were going to trap everyone in there. Jim didn't ask any more questions. He basically just told us to haul ass out. This led us to believe that girl he was talking to didn't exist. It was just some kind of trap to lure unsuspecting victims into whatever was about to go down in that building that night. We made an anonymous police report that something was going down in there that night, and that it should be investigated and shut down. We spent midnight on that New Year's sitting in my living room by ourselves. We never found out what transpired in that warehouse. It was New Year's Eve of 2016. My girlfriend and I were hosting a party in my condo. I invited about 30 people and said they could bring whoever they want as long as they were respectful of my place. As we were setting things up for the party, we kept losing things and then finding them back in the same place a few minutes later, like the TV remote, her bag, or just anything we seemed to need at the moment. We thought we were just imagining it, but it kept happening over and over. We figured it was the two of us just accidentally moving stuff without the other knowing. Our guests started pouring in around 9 to 10. That's when we told everyone to arrive. Since my friends would be bringing friends, I positioned some of my surveillance cameras in rooms with valuables, such as the living room and the bedrooms. By the time everyone was over, things were still kind of disappearing. Like at one point, I wanted to show my friends my new pair of shoes my girlfriend got me for Christmas, and I couldn't find them. And even more, my window was left open in my bedroom. Albeit it was a party, and I had to assume my girlfriend or some of the guests had to do with some of this stuff. But it started getting weird. Nevertheless, the condo was crowded, and I didn't have much time to be worrying about this stuff. I told myself I'd check the surveillance footage after the party, or if things persisted, I'd check it during the party. There were a handful of faces I didn't recognize, but I met most of them through whichever friends brought them over. That time of the night that people either can't wait for or dread finally came, and we all started to gather around the TV to watch the ball drop in Times Square. I looked around the room and noticed some tall guy in a black trench coat facing the wall opposite the TV. He was looking down at the couch doing something. I was about to ask my friend Alan if he knew who that was, but everyone started counting down, so I turned my attention to that and joined in. Everyone yelled Happy New Year and all that, and anyone who came as a couple got their New Year's kiss. And when everyone settled down a bit, I realized that tall guy wasn't in the room anymore. I asked Alan if he knew who that tall guy was, and he said yeah, that's Tom's friend. So that was that. One of my friend's girlfriends eventually came downstairs and said whoever the guy in the trench coat wasn't leaving the bathroom. I told her it was Tom's friend, and to just use the master bedroom bathroom, so she went back upstairs. Eventually the clock hit 2 a.m., and that's when things were dwindling down and people were starting to make their exits. When everyone was gone, my girlfriend and I said we'd clean up tomorrow. However, we did a quick inspection to make sure nothing was stolen. Her bag was gone completely this time, and so was one of my expensive watches. I rushed to our bedroom to pause the video cameras so I could download the footage and play it back. We started watching from the time guests started to arrive. I had it on fast forward, and we just skimmed all 3 cameras. Eventually, we noticed Tom's friend in the trench coat in the guest bedroom, going through our stuff. I paused the footage in a fit of rage. I cut the footage to a 30-second clip and sent it to my phone and then texted Tom immediately. I said, "Your friend stole shit from my apartment, bro." He texted back, "Dude, no way, what do you mean?" Then I sent him the footage. A minute later, he texted back, "Who the hell is that? I don't know who that is." I wrote back, "I was told that was your friend." Once again, he said, "Dude, I don't know that guy." My girlfriend and I got nervous now, so I went on a texting spree, texting all of my friends who came, asking if they knew that person. From everyone who was still awake, we got a bunch of no's. So we went to finish the video footage, following the guy in the trench coat. He made his way into our bedroom, opened the door, then started dropping some of our belongings out the window, including my girlfriend's bag. I felt like the room was spinning and my heart was in my throat. Then, the man in the video quickly turned around as if he heard someone coming up the stairs, and he crawled under the bed.
We sped through the rest of the video footage, but he never got out from under the bed. Under the bed that we were currently sitting on using the laptop. I saw the fear in my girlfriend's eyes, and her temptation to scream, but I covered her mouth with my hand and whispered in her ear, "Run on the count of 3. But she couldn't help it. She let out a cry. So I had to yell at her to just run out of the room. I pushed her off the bed and followed close behind. I took a look under the bed before slamming the door shut, and I saw him down there under the bed. We made eye contact. It was an indescribable moment. We called the cops in the kitchen, both grabbing big kitchen knives. Police made it to my condo in like 3 minutes, but by that time the intruder was gone, and our bedroom window was once again open. He escaped through the window and got away with our belongings. I handed over the video footage files to the police department, and they would review it and record an image of the man's face. Of course, he was never found. At least not by our local police department.
My dad has always been too nice of a guy, like a pushover. I'll just start the story with that. I don't say it for no reason. We live in uptown Chicago. We don't have a huge family, so our Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings are always small, like less than 6 people. This was Thanksgiving night of last year, 2019. Dinner was almost done already. My dad was picking up some last-minute foods like stuffing and cranberry sauce at the corner store since we didn't have any. My mom and I started setting the table, while my brother and grandparents sat at the table. My dad finally returned, but with more than just stuffing and cranberry sauce though. He brought someone along with him. It was this middle-aged, dirty-looking man in a green puffer jacket and black pants. He looked homeless. My dad introduced the man as Stefan, and said he would be joining us for dinner tonight. My brother and I exchanged surprised, uncomfortable looks. Then my mom and I did the same. As my dad started preparing the stuffing, he was telling us how he met Stefan alone in the cold streets, and said we as a Christian family should do the right thing and invite him into dinner, as no one should be alone on Thanksgiving. My grandma invited the man to sit with us. I could tell my mom wasn't comfortable with this as she whispered stuff in my dad's ear. Too late now though, the man was already seated at the table. Good thing I didn't sit next to him because I could smell his clothes from across the table. I didn't understand what my dad was thinking with this. When all the food was finally on the table, everyone sat down and we did our prayer. My brother and grandma attempted to hold hands with Stefan, but he didn't grab their hands back. I low-key watched him as we all prayed, and he just sat there, his eyes bulgingly wide, his mouth not moving. He just sat there like he didn't want to be there. After the prayer, we all began to eat, and at least 3 of my family members tried talking to him at some point. He didn't seem friendly at all though. His responses were very dry and one-wordish. It made the dinner a little uncomfortable. I didn't know what my dad saw in this man or why he felt comfortable bringing him into our home. I get trying to help the needy, but there was another way to do it than this. He helped himself to some food, but even the way he ate was really messy. Like his fingers were really greasy, some food got in his hair. It wasn't pleasant to watch. Now you may think I'm just trash-talking a homeless person, so let's move past that. Eventually Stefan said, "Excuse me, I gotta go to the bathroom." My dad pointed him in the direction of the bathroom, which was down the half flight of stairs down the hall to the left. He got up, not saying thank you, and followed the directions. Once we were sure he was out of earshot, my mom and grandparents started asking questions like what the hell is wrong with my dad bringing that man in here? My dad whispered that he felt terrible and wanted to do something right. My mom questioned how we were going to get him out of here now. My dad insisted that we were being good people though, and that we'd agree eventually. We continued eating, till my brother asked, "Where is he? He's been gone a while." We all agreed it was strange, so my dad went down the stairs to the bathroom to look. He came back up a few seconds later saying he wasn't in the bathroom. My grandmas looked very distressed as my grandpa started cursing in Italian. My brother, my dad, and I started checking the whole apartment. My dad was calling Stefan's name the whole time. We checked all the bedrooms, all the closets. Somehow he wasn't anywhere. However, the window in my parents' room was open, enough for someone to climb through, so we assumed the obvious. My mom came in yelling at my dad that this is what happens for him being stupid and letting a potentially dangerous person into our home. We all had to agree, sadly. My dad closed the window, and we tried to go about the rest of our dinner normally. But of course, the whole time we talked about the bizarre encounter. After dinner, we had dessert. Then eventually my grandparents left. The four of us cleaned up the table and dishes, and a couple hours later, everyone dispersed to their rooms for bed. I'm being very loose with the time frame because this was almost a year ago, but I believe it was another hour later that I finally turned off my TV for bed. The silence in the room allowed me to hear it. The breathing. I heard it in my room, not my breathing. I was frozen stiff. I didn't even want to move or sit up. I didn't know where exactly in the room it was coming from. I just looked for the door to my room, trying to sum up the courage to run. I heard the faintest shuffling sounds, like of the fabric of a jacket, and I heard, almost in my ear, "Shh!" and a hand pressed down on my neck. That's when the scream I'd been building up exploded out of my mouth as I literally sprang out from the bed and into the hall, calling for my dad. Everyone came out from their rooms and looked down the hall toward my room when I said Stefan's in there. Shockingly, Stefan stepped out from my room, looked at us, and walked out the front door as my dad yelled at him to get out, of course without getting physical because he's a big softie. Stefan was long gone by the time police finally showed up. The police said the important thing was that he left and none of us were hurt, and now just to make sure to lock the door and windows. They took our description of Stefan and they left. I like to think my dad learned his lesson from that. You can't trust everyone you meet. For Black Friday a few years ago, I went to Best Buy. Well, technically it was midnight the night before Black Friday. My local Best Buy is always open late the night before Black Friday. I went with my best friend Taylor to look for a new laptop and maybe whatever other stuff caught my eye. We split off to look for our own things. While browsing the laptop section, someone in a blue Best Buy shirt approached me asking if I needed help. I gave him specific specs I was interested in, and he started looking around with me. He showed me one laptop he claimed he really liked, then asked me what it was I'd be doing with the laptop. I found it to be a slightly odd question, but maybe it was part of his sales pitch. I said just for school and general web browsing kind of deal. After this point though, he seemed more interested in me rather than helping me. Like he was asking a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from, where I go to school, etc. I don't want to sound self-absorbed, but I do get a decent amount of male attraction when I go out. Anyway, I started realizing he seemed to be hitting on me, and I found him overall creepy, so I reminded him politely about the laptop and that I was in a hurry. He was relentless though. He actually asked for my phone number after that. I made it clear to him I was uninterested. Luckily I locked eyes with Taylor, who happened to be walking over, and I mouthed the word help to her. She understood, and she came over and called my name, saying come in, hurry. I said sorry I have to go to the creepy guy, and followed Taylor away. We walked to the other side of the store. I told her I didn't want to see that guy again. He was obsessive and creepy and didn't get the hints. We left the store after that with plans of going shopping elsewhere tomorrow. We were both starving though, so we went to the nearby diner, which is open 24/7. We sat at a booth and looked at the menu. The place was practically empty at this hour, except for a lone man sitting at the bar, seemingly looking at the menu as well. His back was to me. I didn't notice him there 5 minutes earlier. He was in a gray jacket, but I recognized his hair. I whispered to Taylor to look at him. As we looked at him, he tried to subtly turn to look at us, but when he realized we were already staring, he looked away. It was him, the Best Buy worker. "Oh my God, he followed us," I whispered. "Let's go," I said, and we got up and left the diner. We hurried to my car and I drove us home to my house as fast as I could. Taylor was sleeping over that night. To put it short, eventually there were 3 slow knocks on the living room window.
We both shrieked and didn't know what to do. My apartment is on the bottom floor. It's him, we kept saying. We went to the window, but oddly couldn't see outside, like total blackness. The view of outside was blocked. We were too creeped out. We had to call the cops. When we got a knock on the door from police, we immediately felt safer. So it turned out the reason we couldn't see out the window is because a shirt was hung over the window, blocking view in or outside. Not just any shirt, a blue Best Buy shirt. Pinned to the shirt was a post-it note that said, "I don't work at Best Buy, bitch." So the police recommended I file a harassment charge. But the problem was I didn't know his name or who it was. They said I could get a lawyer and get the surveillance footage from Best Buy to find the guy, but it sounded like a lot of work. I let it go, but I stayed at Taylor's apartment for a few days. I still can't believe that guy followed us all the way to my house. Some people are dangerously crazy. I'd like to preface this by saying that I live a pretty quote-unquote straight-edge lifestyle, so I'm certain that what I saw and heard last New Year's Eve wasn't the result of some hallucination or drunken stupor, but was 100% real. I live on the outskirts of your stereotypical small southern town, so a few of my friends live out further into the boondocks that are only accessible by those dark, country back roads. One of my friends, Darren, lives with his family in one of the richer neighborhoods in the area that can only be reached by these back roads. Every year, his family throws a party at their house on New Year's Eve where all the family's friends are invited, myself included. It's a pretty fun occasion, so I'm always excited when I get the formal invitation from Darren's parents in the mail. Seeing as the weather in the south can be pretty weird when it comes to winter, it didn't get really cold until a few days before New Year's Eve. I could remember the newly frigid air paired with the bumpy, unkempt country roads made for an uncomfortable ride to the house. Usually I don't drive with my brights on since I hate how other drivers always blind me with theirs, but the sheer darkness of the windy, narrow road made it a necessity this time. Anyways, the narrow road was surrounded on both sides by dense tree line, so even with my brights, it was hard to see where exactly all the twists and turns were ahead. Notably, there aren't any other houses between the turnoff to the road and Darren's neighborhood, except for a lone shack that seemed like it had been abandoned for years, though I could sometimes see lights on inside whenever I passed this way. A few minutes into the drive, on a particularly straight section of the road, my lights illuminated something ahead amongst the trees, something white against the darkness. As I neared, I could see it was the shape of a person standing all alone on the side of the road. They weren't moving or hiding, just standing completely still with their back to the trees. It was a woman, evidently wearing a white dress or gown of some sort, not at all appropriate for the cold. I didn't turn my brights off out of caution, so I couldn't really make out any specific details in the reflective glare of the white dress as I passed her. I was thanking my lucky stars that she didn't step out in the middle of the road, causing me to stop. But then I started to wonder if maybe I should have stopped to see if she needed some help. Perhaps she was another guest trying to get to Darren's party, but it wasn't until I looked back in my mirror to see in the red glare of my rear lights that the woman had turned her body to follow me, still frozen in that one spot. It was definitely creepy, and in that moment, I was glad I'm not the greatest example of a good Samaritan. No way was that a fellow party guest. I arrived at the party without any further incident around 8 p.m., parking in the gravel circle amongst the dozen or so other cars outside Darren's house, which situated in a large clearing in the surrounding forest, just like all the other spaced out houses in the neighborhood. The festivities went on until we had watched both the ball drop in New York, as well as our own time zone's clock striking 12, after which everyone slowly started to clear out. I stayed behind a bit to help clean up as I usually did, since I was one of the closer friends of Darren's family, and by the time I myself left, my car was the only one left at the front of the house. When I got in and started it up, I got a low tire pressure light. My car is an older model, so it didn't give me exact details as to which tire was low or how many had the issue. Before I freaked out, I remembered that this sort of thing always happens with my tires when the weather first turned cold after a long warm period. I figured I'd be able to make it home okay. But before I drove off, I remembered that woman I had seen on my way there. Was she still out there somewhere? Had anyone else come across her? There was another way in the opposite direction I could use to get home to avoid that road, but it would add another 20 minutes or so to my commute, which I didn't want to do so late at night and with possible drunk drivers out and about. I figured I'd just suck it up and just go back the way I came. I really wish I didn't. Not even a few minutes out on that same dark back road, I could feel something was different with my tires. I could hear it too. It sounded like bare metal scraping against the road. Slowly, my car came to a dead stop. Shit, I muttered. This was a different situation entirely. All that was going through my head was, did my tires fall off? Against my better judgment, I had to get out of the car to see what was wrong. Stupidly, I turned the engine off and shut the door. The car's lights turned off automatically, and I was plunged into the deep darkness of the surrounding forest. With my phone flashlight, I scanned each of my tires. My heart sank, as each and every one of them had been ripped to shreds, as if they were torn apart by the claws of some animal. I could have reasoned that if one had a large puncture in it, the bumpy road could have caused even more damage. But all 4 tires? This was deliberate. But no, I thought. Could it have been? I stood around hopelessly. No one would be out at such an hour on this road, even on New Year's Eve. I'd have to call a towing service or for someone to come and get me. But of course, there was no phone service this deep into the boonies. But just as I was about to get back into the car, the gentle wind died down. The barren tree branches stopped swaying, and even the wildlife that was still out this time of year went quiet. I froze. I had never heard such silence before. It was as if time had stopped for a minute before I heard the sickening sound of a twig snap somewhere within the trees. Something was moving around. I instantly shut the light from my phone off, leaving complete darkness. Leaves on the ground continued to rustle, as if someone was stalking through the forest. Was it a squirrel, a deer? No. This was the type of silence of prey when a predator was nearby. And then I heard, "I see you." My stomach dropped. All the air was sucked out of my body. I couldn't even scream. It was a woman's voice, soft and quiet, coming from the pitch-black darkness of the tree line not 15 feet away. It was said without malice, which somehow made it even freakier. In that moment, all I wanted to do was just shrivel up onto the ground and die. And then I heard, "Can you see me?" It wasn't until I heard the voice again that my fight or flight response kicked in, but I was disoriented, standing there in the darkness. I had to turn my phone light back on if I wanted to see which direction I wanted to flee. I aimed the flashlight directly in front of me, and standing at the edge of the tree line was the woman in the white gown, this time her features visible. The gown was dirty, covered in dark stains. She was deathly pale, skinny as a rail, and her disheveled gray hair fell down to her elbows. But her face was almost indescribable, grotesque, as if she were missing half of her jaw, yet it seemed as though she were trying to grin at me. In my indecisive horror, I had the flashlight trained on her for a few moments before I hauled ass down the road back towards Darren's house. That shack I had mentioned earlier was closer to my current position down the opposite direction. But what if this woman was the one who actually lived there? I don't know if that was a rational thought made in the spur of the moment, but I had no time to wonder. As I sprinted down the road, I could hear the snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves behind me. She was chasing me, but I was quickly able to lose her with such a massive rush of adrenaline. I made it back to Darren's house, ignoring the rest of the neighborhood, and I pounded on the door, pleading for the door to open up. His mother answered the door and quickly ushered me inside, seeing how shaken up I was, where I explained everything to her along with Darren and his father. They were sympathetic, offering to let me stay the night there while they called the police and a towing service, which I gladly accepted before even contacting my own family. The police said they would search the area around the road that night and that I could come get my car back and make a statement the next day. But all I wanted to do for now was put that night behind me and fade to sleep in the guest bedroom. But I soon found out that night wasn't over. I awoke from my sleep to the sound of a light tap from the second-story window. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. I remember the time exactly. 3:14 a.m. Of course, none of the windows in the room had blinds. I didn't dare look out until I heard the muffled voice from outside, the same voice saying, "I see you." The woman was still out there. She had chased me all the way here, and now she was throwing rocks to get my attention. If I wasn't going to look out the window before, I definitely wasn't going to now. I wasn't going to leave my spot in that bed or fall asleep until morning. When the sun rose and Darren's family woke up, the woman was gone, thankfully. I told them what else happened, and we all looked outside together before the police showed up. In the yard, about where I had heard the voice coming from, Darren's father found a large, rusty knife that didn't belong to the family, presumably what the woman had used when slashing my tires. But that also meant she had followed my car there to the party at the beginning of the night, and specifically targeted me when everyone else was inside during the festivities. Darren's parents called and asked the other party guests if they had seen anything suspicious the night before, and one of their friends said they had seen someone in a white dress walking around outside from the window, but thought nothing of it, seeing as how people were coming and going all night. When I gave the police my statement, I told them to check around that shack on the road here, as I had a hunch that woman had something to do with it. They eventually did, and updated me that they found no one living there, but there was dead, gutted wildlife sprawled all around the surrounding woods. That woman I saw was never found, which of course raises a bunch of questions. The scariest ones to me, though, are how she was able to track me down so quickly once I left the party, and if she was missing so much of her face, how was she able to pronounce those words so clearly? Despite what happened, I'll still be going to Darren's house for New Year's Eve again this year, but this time, I'll make sure to carpool and take the long way around. When I was 26, I took a trip to San Diego via plane. I stayed with my friend for a few days and booked a late flight back home. My flight landed at midnight. By the time I was off the plane and by the ground transportation pickup point, it was like 12:30. I waved down a random taxi in the taxi section and gave the driver my home address. He said he'd take me for $30, which was a really good deal compared to Uber. He came out to help me put my bag in the trunk of the van, but I said I was fine with it in the seat next to me, so he lifted my bag onto the seat on the left side behind him. I was sitting diagonal from him. He got back in the car and pulled up the directions to my apartment, and we were on our way. My at-the-time apartment was about a half-hour drive from the airport with no traffic. At this hour, there was obviously no traffic. We got right on the highway and we were moving fast. I caught the driver's eyes staring at me through the mirror on 2 separate occasions, and on the second time, he spoke. He asked where I was coming from. I said San Diego. He said, "Oh, very nice." Then he asked me what I was doing there. I said I was just visiting a friend who lives there. His response was, "Is your friend as pretty as you?" And honestly, my first reaction was to laugh, but I found the comment really creepy, and it being the third thing out of his mouth on the ride didn't help. From here, his questions kind of stayed on the flirty side. He asked me, "What is a pretty girl like you doing traveling all by yourself?" And I had a slightly sassy response saying, "Well, I just said I wasn't alone, I was visiting my friend." And his rebuttal was that by flying by myself, I was traveling by myself. I maintained my slight sass and said we can agree to disagree, and he laughed and said he was only teasing me. This man had to be like 45 though. I felt like him hitting on a lone girl in her 20s like this was slightly creepy. It wasn't the first time I dealt with something like this though. As we continued down the highway, I looked up as I saw the familiar overpass right by my exit, but as we passed it, he wasn't slowing down. I said this is my exit as he was literally about to pass it, and we zoomed right by it. I repeated myself louder, saying that was my exit. He apologized and said he'd catch the next one. I tried to get a peek at his screen to see if he put the right address in, but it was angled so that I couldn't see it. The next exit was about a mile further. I started sitting up on the edge of my seat a bit now. When the next exit approached, I said loud and clear, "You need to get off here," and without acknowledging me, he turned on his blinker and merged off the exit. I noticed him glaring at me for a second in the mirror. I almost sensed a hint of annoyance in his face. But I guess that quickly changed when not even a minute later he asked me if I had a boyfriend. I replied back instantly, "Yes, he lives with me." I noticed him look at me again, and I think he picked up on how quickly I answered that. He asked what my boyfriend's name is. Yes, I'm serious. I decided that was enough.
I told him I'm going to put my headphones in, so I popped my AirPods into my ears, even though they were basically dead still. I just wanted this man to stop asking me questions. Asking my boyfriend's name was next level weird, almost like he was interrogating me. I texted my family and close friends about this creepy taxi driver, and I shared my location in case, God forbid, things went sour. We were in a familiar area in my town now. We were stopped at the first red light since getting off the highway. I looked in the mirror, and all I saw were his eyes glaring at me, almost in this menacing way. I know he didn't say anything to me because I didn't even have any music or anything playing, so I would have heard him. The light was now green, and he was still staring at me. I had to tell him the light was green, and he started moving again. No one in my family was answering except for my older brother, who must have been the only one awake, but he lives 2 hours away from me. My brother told me I should leave the car if I feel threatened or in danger. We were now on a main road in my town, but there weren't any cars on the road. It was nearing 1 a.m. on a weeknight. We stopped at another red light, and I felt that man glaring at me again through the mirror. I then noticed a police car parked in an empty parking lot. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, I grabbed my bag and backpack and slid the van door open. The man started yelling at me, "What are you doing?" And he tried closing the door with the power button in the front, but I forced it open, and the second the door was opened wide enough for me to fit out, I booked it toward the police car. Instead of getting out of the car and chasing me for my money, he just kept driving, which already was a huge red flag. When I saw him driving away, I stopped running and brought my pace down to a quick walk to the police car. The officer in the car noticed me as I saw him look up and roll down his window. I told him that the taxi driver who was driving me was giving me really bad vibes and I left for my own safety. I asked the cop if he could give me a ride home, and thankfully he said hop in the back seat. Being a scared female obviously helped, but do I think you should be going up to cops asking them to be your free taxi service? Absolutely not. By the time I was in the car, that taxi was already long gone. The cop drove me home, and we were there in about 5 to 10 minutes. I let myself in and didn't even bother unpacking. I went straight to brush my teeth and crash into bed. It seemed just as I got into bed, though, there was a knock at the front door of my apartment. What if it was the taxi driver? He had my address after all. What if he came for his money? Or worse? The knocks persisted for a few minutes, then it went silent for a few minutes, and then there were more knocks. Obviously, I never left my room. I didn't want to be anywhere near the front door. The door was locked, and that's what mattered. Eventually, the knocks stopped, and I drifted away to sleep. The next day, I was back to work. I had a slightly later shift, luckily, so I didn't have to get up too early. While I was at work, though, I got a call from my next-door neighbor, George. He said that my dad was there before, trying to get into my apartment to drop something off, but he didn't have a key. George was calling to confirm that I was in fact expecting my dad, and I said no, I hadn't heard from him. George said he didn't see him actually leave anything though, he was just checking through the windows, which caught his attention. I thanked him, and then called my dad, and as I was expecting, my dad said he was at work and had not stopped by my house. I took this time to explain the entire taxi driver situation to my dad again, but over the phone this time. He wanted me to come home for a few nights, and I said I would. I just need to go home and pack my things up first. After work, I got home around 9 p.m. I finished up my laundry from the night before and packed a bag with some clothes and my work stuff for the next few days. Something in my apartment felt off, though. I never get nervous from being alone, but that night, I felt like I wasn't alone. Deep down, I felt like it was because the whole taxi driver situation made me uncomfortable. But I felt like I kept hearing small cracks in the wood floor, like from the pressure of someone's weight. I just couldn't pinpoint from where. I was honestly freaking myself out and tried to hurry up and get all my stuff and go. It was about the moment I was ready to leave the house when I heard a creaking sound from down the hallway, from the spare bedroom. I turned and heard a voice say, "I wasn't gonna hurt you." And I saw an arm swing into view from behind the wall, and I just took off to the front door before he could even enter the hallway. I was outside, screaming and pounding on my neighbor George's door. It was still early enough where he and his wife were awake. They came rushing outside, and I begged for help. Instead of entering my apartment, we called 911 and waited for the officers to show up before going inside. My apartment wasn't huge, so checking each and every potential hiding spot didn't take long.
The back sliding door to the shared backyard area was open, which also suggested he fled through the backyard. Unfortunately, I didn't have any record of the taxi ride I took, so I didn't have the cab number or plate number or anything. I could only describe it as a yellow minivan and give the description of the man. I did, however, describe the route we took and the time I remember getting into town, hoping maybe they could knock on some local business doors and check their cameras pointed to the streets. I grabbed my already packed bags and headed to my parents' house, where I stayed for a week. They wanted me to stay even longer, but I had to get back home. My dad helped me install some cameras from Amazon on my front and back doors, and I also bought a taser to put next to my bed for self-defense. I've lived in 2 different apartments since this experience. I've never had to use the taser. I also avoid taxis now if I'm alone, as they are a lot less traceable than a ride-sharing app. But also, you hear about fake taxi drivers kidnapping people all the time. I have to wonder if that was a real taxi driver at all, or if it was a stolen vehicle. When my cousin Cody and I were in our early 20s, we went on a handful of camping trips around Colorado. This happened, I believe, when I was 22 and he was 23, and it happened in Arapahoe Forest. It was my first time camping there, not Cody's though. It was in the middle of the week. Our jobs allowed us to have off days in the middle of the week, and we'd often go on our campouts then to avoid traffic and crowds. I always let Cody take charge on these trips. He's the Eagle Scout, not me. We parked by a picnic area, and we set foot into the woods from there. After about 15 minutes of hiking deeper into the woods, we found a good spot to set up camp. A good spot meaning a big enough clearing to fit 2 tents, the portable stove, and a campfire. The first thing we did was unpack our stuff and set up our tents. Cody has always been a lot quicker than me in pitching a tent. He does it in only a few minutes. It always takes me over 20 minutes. Or rather, it always took me over 20 minutes, as I haven't been camping out in the wilderness since this. The next thing we did was create a ring of stones for a fire, and then gathered some sticks and wood. He did bring some fire starter and a lighter, so I guess we kind of cheated, but oh well. It was at the point in the day when the sun was going down. We had a fire going, and now Cody was grilling up some steak and burgers. One thing about Cody is he always went all out with the food on these trips, and he's a really good cook, so I always trusted him with feeding us. Of course, we had our bear spray in case the smell of the food would attract a black bear, which Cody always said was very unlikely. He always says the real thing you gotta worry about in the middle of the woods is other people. As we ate our steak and burgers, we cracked open some beers and had some classic rock playing on the speaker. If you've never been camping, you don't understand how good of a vibe moments like this are. In the wilderness with a friend or family member and some beers, reminiscing about good times and vibing to music. As it got dark, we started playing card games on this little folding platform table we brought specifically for cards. After playing more traditional card games, we started playing Uno, and this was when we heard something out in the woods. I paused the song on my phone so that the speaker would go silent. It was clear now. We heard a person humming and footsteps from beyond the trees in the pitch blackness of the forest. Cody urged me to find the flashlight. I tried, but by the time I found it, the sounds had faded away. I asked Cody if that was something to be concerned about, and he said it definitely was unusual for someone else to be this deep in the woods, let alone creepily walking by a campsite with an active campfire humming loudly. I was a bit shaken, and I saw Cody was too. We went back to playing cards with the music much lower now. When we least expected it, a big stick landing in the middle of our campsite made us both jump out of our skin. It didn't fall from a tree. This thing was thrown at us by someone. Cody started yelling something along the lines of, "Whoever's out there messing with us, get a life and f*** off." And then, footsteps could be heard once again in the distance. They were walking away from us. I said we should pack up camp and move somewhere else. He said absolutely not in the dark. We both had bear spray, and he advised to just keep it next to me in my tent when we go to sleep. It was the closest thing to ranged self-defense weapons we had. We kept hearing sounds like tree branches cracking in the distance, sounds that you would never expect an animal to be making. Someone was out there,
Maybe multiple people, that much was clear. We had to go to sleep eventually, so we agreed that maybe we should take turns staying up to keep watch to make sure that no one comes to our campsite and steals anything, or worse. Cody agreed to take first watch. He said he'd stay up and read his book. So I crawled into my tent and then my sleeping bag and went to sleep. Waking up in the middle of the night while camping is normal. You're in a cold, outdoor environment in an uncomfortable sleeping bag. Any number of things could wake you up. I didn't yet know what woke me up. I was still in a fog. My brain didn't feel fully woken up yet. I looked up and saw a head peering into my tent. It looked like Cody. I rubbed my eyes, but really it was the darkness that was preventing me from seeing anything of his face. I said, "Cody?" thinking he was waking me up to take my turn of keeping watch. I said groggily, "Is it my turn?" I stared at the head peering at me in my sleeping bag, slowly growing more awake every second. Then I heard the zipper to the tent quickly zip up, and his head disappeared. I laid back down in my sleeping bag, but only for a second. I suddenly had some weird moment of clarity, where I shot to an upright position and listened as the footsteps walked away. "Cody," I said. He didn't answer. I unzipped my tent to peek out to the campsite. The fire was dead. Cody wasn't out there. I went over to Cody's tent, which was zipped up. I unzipped it and looked inside to see Cody fast asleep in his sleeping bag. I got chills, goosebumps, whatever you want to call it. I almost shit myself at the realization. I started shaking him awake, and when he finally awoke, I told him someone's here, at the campsite. It took him a minute to come back to reality just like I did, but when he did, he grabbed his bear spray. He said he must have dozed off while reading. He said I should sleep in the tent with him tonight, but to do that, I'd need my sleeping bag. He came outside of the tent with me and stood watch as I ran to my tent to grab my sleeping bag. In my tent, grabbing my sleeping bag, I heard that goddamn humming again from outside. I grabbed it and Cody whispered at me to hurry up. I said, "You hear that too?" He said yes. We both got back in his tent and zipped it up, with our cans of bear spray by our sides. I tell you, in those moments, I wanted nothing more than for a bear to come and save the day. The hours dragged on as I stayed up while Cody slept. After 3 long, horrible hours, I woke him up and we switched. When Cody woke me up, it was almost dawn. There was light outside. So we packed everything up, and by the time we were done, there was plenty of light to hike back to the car. While we could have driven somewhere else and had another night of camping elsewhere, neither of us were feeling it anymore. This was a haunting experience, and I think we both just wanted to be in the safety of our houses. It's been 6 years since this happened, and he's hit me up a few times since then about camping, but I haven't really had interest since this experience. People are just too scary. Why was someone out there stalking our campsite? And the sight of that person's head in the dark, just looking into my tent, it was straight up from a nightmare. I may never go camping again, honestly. When my friends and I rented a beach house in Florida, I never could have expected how things would have turned out. It was the 4 of us in a cramped car driving down there. The house was directly on the beach. It was on this road that had the bay in front of the house across the street, and then in the backyard was literally the beach. There were some huge houses on this road, and some smaller, more normal-looking ones. This was one of the more modest-looking ones. It had 4 bedrooms, so a bedroom for each of us. The houses were spaced out on this road, creating a sense of privacy, and the whole time we were unloading the car out front, not a single car passed by on this road. The interior of the house was decent. It wasn't spectacular, but it was modest, clean, and the owners were really pushing a beach theme with the wall decor. I guess it would make sense considering the location. There was even a decorative surfboard in one corner of the living room behind the TV. The living room looked out to the back deck, which then looked out to the beach. The view was amazing. The deck wasn't elevated very high off the ground. It was just 2 steps down and onto the sand. We all claimed our bedrooms. I managed to get one of the rooms with a view of the beach. First thing we did after settling in was, of course, walking outside and laying on the beach. We all went in the water at one point and then played football. We were definitely on the beach for a few hours.
We seemed to be the only ones on the beach apart from this older looking couple way down the beach. Afterwards, we went out to eat and then started bar hopping in the town area. When we Ubered back, it was dark out. We went outside on the beach to fuck around and play late night football while we were kinda drunk. As I was running to grab the ball after missing a catch, I noticed something in the water. The moon reflecting on the ocean was the only reason I could see it. I said, "What the fuck is that?" out loud, and then realized it was a person standing in the water, about waist deep. My friends looked over and said they saw it too. It was only a little weird because of the time. It was like past midnight, but hey, if a local wants to go for a midnight swim, that's their business. We then went to sit on the deck and drink beers for a while until we got tired, and one by one, everyone started going inside to go to sleep. My friend John and I were the last ones out there. I had been every once in a while glancing in the direction I saw that person before in the water, just out of curiosity. And so eventually, when I shot a glance in that direction, I spotted someone standing on the beach. They appeared to be just standing there facing us. It was kind of creepy. Maybe a neighbor. I didn't want to be rude. But I wondered if it was the same person. We tried to ignore it, but John was facing that person, and after a while, he said they were still just standing there facing us. I stood up and looked over and saw he was right. I yelled out, "Is everything okay?" John asked, "Why'd you do that?" I honestly didn't know what I was expecting. They didn't even reply anything though. We were officially creeped out, so we went inside. The other two, Travis and Liam, were already in their rooms, probably knocked out from drinking. So John and I decided to just call it a night too, so that we could have a full day tomorrow. If I had to guess, it was 12:30 to 1 a.m., which was honestly on the earlier side, but we were all burnt out from the long day. I went to my room after brushing my teeth. I looked out the window wanting to take a look to the ocean before crawling into bed. This is where the creepiness factor escalated substantially, because there was now someone standing in front of the back deck, facing the house. I felt like they were facing my window. The figure of the person appeared to be male, considering the slightly larger frame. It was undoubtedly the same person from before. I called John's name. He didn't reply. So I ran to his room and banged on his door, telling him to come out. He came out pretty quickly, and I led him to my window to look outside, but now the person was gone. I swore to him that the person from earlier was just standing as still as before right in front of our deck. He believed me. We weren't about to go outside and look around though. I took one more look to make sure that they were still gone, and then I shut the blind to the bedroom window. But as I lay awake in bed, rolling from side to side, trying to sleep, I just couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still outside. Who was that person? Why were they creeping around? My thoughts were interrupted by the sickening sound of a fist knocking on the bedroom window. I felt like my insides just shriveled up and my heart completely dropped out of my body. I laid silent and frozen. Moments later, another light set of knocks on the glass. I didn't dare lift the blind though. I couldn't gather the courage to. I almost yelled, "Who is it?" but I stopped myself. Instead, I ran out to the living room, screaming for everyone to wake up. Everyone, one by one, came out of their rooms. No one was at the window when we checked. All four of us went out to the deck and turned on the lights to the deck. We looked out onto the beach and didn't see anyone. We also checked the front and sides of the house. No one. John and I had to explain to the other two what they missed when they fell asleep. We kept the backyard lights on that night. The next day, John and I went to the two nearest neighbors and asked them if they had also experienced someone knocking on their windows or doors. One of the neighbors told us a genuinely freaky encounter he had a week earlier. Someone knocked on their door in the middle of the night, and when he asked who it was, they wouldn't answer and just kept knocking, so he didn't answer the door. I'm not sure if it was connected, but if it was, that just makes this even scarier. We spent the rest of the day on the beach, exploring nearby towns, and hitting bars. Nothing happened that night. We left the next day. I still wonder what I would have seen if I had lifted the blind. I was 9 years old when this happened. For whatever reason, I was home alone one night, so I was playing video games upstairs in my room. I wasn't allowed to answer the door to anyone when I was home alone. Whenever I was left alone, it wasn't for long.
My mom would just be out grocery shopping or something like that. I was playing Metroid Prime on my GameCube. I used to be obsessed with that game. I heard the house phone downstairs start to ring. My mom always told me to pick up the phone if it rang, in case it was her calling. So I hurried downstairs, and by maybe the fourth ring, I picked up. The caller ID was from my mom's cell phone. She said, "Sweetie, can you come outside and help with the groceries?" I replied, "Mom?" She said back, "Yes." I felt like something sounded off with her voice. You obviously know your own mom's voice, and so even at such a young age, when I was questioning why it didn't sound like her, I said, "Why do you sound like that?" She replied, "Like what, sweetie?" And I hung up. My mom would never use the word sweetie like that, especially twice in a matter of seconds. The phone rang again, and my mom's number came up on the caller ID again. I ignored it. For some reason, my heart was racing. I was nervous. I sat in the kitchen, waiting to see if the phone would ring a third time, and it did. It took a couple minutes before the third ringing, but when I checked the caller ID, this time it was a different number. I picked up, and a man's voice on the other end said, "Hey James, I know this is gonna sound weird, but it's your dad. I'm outside." All I could mutter out was a weak, "What?" The man said, "I'm outside. I have a lot to explain." I hung up right then and there. My dad died when I was 3. I have no memories of him. My suspicion was in fact true that the first voice I heard was not my mom's. The phone rang again, and then again after that. I ignored it each time. I couldn't even call my mom because someone clearly had her phone. Then things took a turn for the worse when there were knocks at the front door. This went from a "someone has my mom's phone" situation to a "someone is outside the house" situation. My mom would not be knocking on the door. She'd have a key, obviously. I peered around the wall of the kitchen to look at the front door. I heard a man's muffled voice on the other side saying my name. He was saying, "It's your dad." He rang the doorbell, and then I heard him start attempting to open the door. I did something that no 9-year-old should ever have to do, and that was grabbing the phone and calling 911. The 911 operator asked me what I imagined to be some pretty standard questions, most importantly telling me to wait in a bathroom or other room with a lockable door until the police get there. The bathroom is on the first floor of the house. I hid in there with the lights off. Whoever was outside came to the window and tried pulling it open. I heard their entire struggle. Then they must have moved to the next window. I think they tried every window and door in the house. If anything were to have been unlocked, this story would have had a very different outcome. They must have given up at some point before the police arrived. And I say they because clearly there were 2 people involved in this, a man and a woman. They both could have been out there for all I know. The operator told me that the police are at the front door now and it's safe to go meet them there. Only when I opened the door to the police was when I hung up the phone. They did a quick investigation inside and outside of the house and asked me where my mom was supposed to be and if my mom knew anyone who might want to hurt us. I'm sure I said I thought she was grocery shopping or something, and not that I know of. My mom returned home with my little sister in a panic when she saw the police cars out front. My mom's phone was stolen, which was already clear. I'm sure that our address, home phone number, and other personal information was stored somewhere on the phone, easily accessible, though how they knew my name, I'm not exactly sure. Something on my mom's phone must have given it away. It was an old Nokia flip phone. Who stole it was a mystery. But my mom's phone background was a picture of her with my little sister and I. This could have been an indication to some disgusting, creepy couple out there that the owner of this phone was a single mom with 2 young kids, and they tried to use that as a way of tricking me into leaving the house, which is absolutely disgusting and horrific. The phone must have been destroyed after the failed attempts at trying to lure me outside. Things were a little different after this. My mom wouldn't leave me alone anymore at night. Not until I was a few years older, at least. My friend Carlos and I would always go out shoveling people's sidewalks after big snowstorms to make some quick cash. In like 2013 or 2014, our town was in the midst of a blizzard. It was dark, windy, and snow was building up fast. Our school already announced it would be closed due to snow the next day. So with nothing to do that night, and it being only like 8 p.m.,
We went out with our shovels and started ringing doorbells, offering to shovel sidewalks for cash. We got a lot of no's before we got our first yes. We made around $15 each on our first house. We made our way across the neighborhood. A lot of people weren't interested, and most people just wouldn't open their doors. We got a second house eventually, and made a little more money on that one. Then I remember a long gap between that house and the next house that would say yes. It was a small corner house, but usually corner houses would pay more. We rang the bell, and the door cracked open, but whoever was on the other side didn't show their face. They did, however, speak from the other side. A deep man's voice said, "Who's there?" I pitched our snow shoveling service to the man on the other side, requesting $40 in return since it was a corner house. There was a short silence. Then the voice on the other side said, "Oh yes, please, $40 is fine." There was a hint of nervousness in the voice. I said all right, and then the door shut. I didn't see the man's face at all. I turned to Carlos and said that was weird, but we started the shoveling. I started from the front porch down the walkway to the driveway. Carlos worked on the sidewalks. I couldn't help but stare at the house every once in a while, and at one point when I turned to a window as I was throwing the snow from my shovel onto the ground, I saw who I assumed to be the homeowner. He was standing at one of the windows, watching me. Could I see anything of his face? Not really. He was standing in a dark room. A little uncomfortable it made me, but I tried my best to ignore it and continue shoveling. Of course, I'd occasionally glance back, and he would still be there. Eventually, I finished the driveway, just around the same time Carlos finished the sidewalks. So we started our way back up the walkway to the front stoop. But before getting to the stoop, the door opened, and the man inside shouted, "Go around back." Carlos and I froze, looked at each other, then obeyed his command. We stepped through the snow-covered grass to the backyard gate. I opened it and pushed it through the rising snow, which was slightly difficult. Then, there we were, in the man's backyard, which had a small awning that we stayed under to get out from the falling snow. We waited by the back door, expecting him to come outside eventually with our money. We waited for over a minute and started getting antsy. I started pounding on the back door since there didn't seem to be a doorbell. Then there was the sound of a window being rotated open, followed by the man's voice again, saying, "Come inside." Carlos and I looked at each other again, and then I led the way in through the back door. All the lights in this house were turned off. It was actually so hard to see anything, really. "Hello?" I said. I heard a man's voice from another room call, "I'm counting your money on the table." It seemed he was inside the kitchen, which was connected by a small door through the room we entered from. We walked closer to the kitchen, which appeared to be lit up through the window only by the streetlights standing on the side of the house. I stood at the doorway, intending on looking through the crack of the door to see where the guy was standing in the kitchen, but I couldn't see through the crack because it was blocked by him. The man was standing on the other side of the door, looking through the crack. I turned and pretended I didn't see him. I made up some bull, like telling Carlos we forgot something outside. We left the house, and the man didn't say a word. As soon as we got outside, we grabbed our shovels and sprinted away from there. All of our hard work shoveling that house was for nothing. We got back to my backyard, put the shovels away, and went inside to warm up and rest for a little bit. Carlos and I chilled for a little bit, then it was time for him to go. He went out the back to get his shovel, but he came back inside, concerned, telling me to come take a look at something. There was an extra, fresh set of boot marks in the snow. You may ask how we knew. That's because one set trailed from the gate to the back door to the shed in the corner of our backyard. Carlos hurried back inside, and we told my mom. We live in a very poor, relatively unsafe neighborhood, so my mom was quick to believe us and get 911 on the phone. Police showed up relatively quickly considering the horrible driving conditions, and they went to investigate the shed. Carlos, my mom, and I watched through the back window as the police pulled out a man from the shed. He had a matching shirt from what I could see through the window back when we were shoveling that property. It was undoubtedly the house owner. He later admitted to police that he was going to attempt to break into the house when we all went to sleep. Why, however, he never answered. Police also said he was very intoxicated when he admitted this, which made me think, What on earth was he going to do to us in that kitchen if we didn't leave his house? It was an early December night, and we were having our first snowstorm of the year. I was in my bed watching some low-budget Christmas film while texting various friends, mostly my friends George and Pat. We used to text in a 3-person group chat. Everything was as it should be when I felt my heart drop to my stomach as a bang came from the window right next to my bed. I opened the curtain, but there was no one standing out there. Then, pow, there was another, as I was still looking out the window. It was a snowball. Someone was throwing snowballs at my window. I stood on my bed to get the best possible view out the window, but I didn't see anyone standing out there in the snow. So I actually lifted open my window to call out. It was almost immediately after I shouted out the window that I heard someone's laughter. Not a child's laughter like I was expecting it to be. It was a deeper voice, could belong to anyone from the age of 17 to 40 for all I knew. I shut the window and started texting in our little group chat saying I knew it was one of them messing with me. The fact that they now weren't responding made me even more confident. I didn't close the curtain as I knew whichever one of them it was, they weren't done messing with me. And just like that, another snowball hit my window. I lifted the window up quickly to try and catch them, and there he was standing in the snow, waving to me. But it wasn't either of my friends. It was some guy in a black beanie and black coat with gloves on, laughing. He started approaching the window. I hurried and slammed it shut and twisted the little lock. I also closed the curtain so that he couldn't look into my room. Both of my friends had texted back by now with question mark responses. Then there was a single knock at my window, and it started being fiddled with and shaken. He was trying to lift it open. When it all stopped, I waited a couple minutes before peeking through the curtain. It seemed the coast was clear, so I finally went to go tell my mom and dad about the whole thing, who came to have a look out my window. Sure, my dad believed me, he literally saw the footprints in the snow, but he just didn't see it necessary to call the police, figuring whoever was out there gave up. My dad turned on all the outside lights just as a deterrent, and then they went to sleep. I stayed up in my room with the lights off, continuing to watch movies. My door clicked open. I said get out, assuming it was my little brother. The door shut, so it seemed he listened to me. Silence, except for the TV. I watched for a long while, then a click in my wood floor. I turned, halfway through repeating get out in a louder voice, when realizing it was not my short little brother. It was that tall man in the black beanie and coat from outside. He started waving to me again at the doorway, then put his pointer finger up to his lips. He started walking over to my bed, and that's when I got up, ready to defend myself. He approached faster now, easily grabbed me, and covered my mouth with his leather gloves. There was a wet white towel in his glove that he was pressing to my face for a long time. I tried to break free and scream, but I couldn't, and that was the last thing I remember before everything went black. I woke up in my living room with my parents and police hovering over me. An ambulance arrived shortly. My dad heard the commotion going on in my room and came to find the man over me. My dad, much larger than that man, managed to overpower him, but not long enough before the police could arrive. He ran out the front door and disappeared. I was quickly brought to the hospital. Thankfully, I was all right. If you're wondering, the man climbed in through our downstairs window. It's a little-known common courtesy out in the mountains during a snowstorm that if someone's seeking shelter in your cabin, you let them in. No, I wasn't the one offering that courtesy to someone else in the story. I was the one seeking refuge. It was supposed to be a long weekend of hunting, but what started as a cold, sunny day quickly formed tons of dark storm clouds, and I quickly found myself right in the middle of a blizzard. After a full, rather unsuccessful day of hunting hares, I was way too far and disoriented to make my way back to my cabin, I had to seek refuge somewhere else. I came across a log cabin nestled between a circle of trees. No lights on, but I still had to try the door. I hit the door with my fist a few times. No answer, but I could hear footsteps on the other side, approaching the door. I expected it to open, but it didn't. I shouted that I'm lost and need shelter. The door cracked open, and I heard a voice say, "Come in, leave your boots by the door." I waited a bit, expecting him to open the door fully and formally greet me as anyone would, but that didn't happen, so I pushed the door open myself and entered the dark cabin. The room was lit by 2 candles, just enough for me to see the couch that the man then told me to sleep on. As for the man, all I saw was his silhouette on the far side of the room. The little light from the candles didn't extend that far. I dropped my bag and gun on the floor and laid down on the couch. I thanked the man for letting me crash here till the storm blows over. He didn't answer. His behavior wasn't the most bizarre thing. Folks are strange up in the mountains. If he wasn't up for conversation, I'd just get some early shut-eye. I closed my eyes, though the level of darkness with my eyes closed wasn't much of a difference. I was subconsciously waiting to hear the man's footsteps leave the room, but they never did. I opened my eyes, and his silhouette was still in the corner of the room, just standing there. I felt the need to say, "Yeah, I think I'm just gonna get some sleep now, thanks." No response. I turned to my other side so that I wouldn't be tempted to just keep opening my eyes to check on him. Some time passed, but without having heard his footsteps walk away, the curiosity was eating away at me. I turned over to look again, and this time, I swear to God, the silhouette of the man was closer by at least a few feet. I couldn't make out his face, but the slight glow from the candles would just barely trickle around the man's forehead, and what I saw was disgustingly pale skin. I quickly gathered my belongings and thanked him, but I said I had to go. I didn't look at him anymore, because I don't think I wanted to know what he looked like. I put my boots on outside and hurried back into the blizzard. I came across another cabin down the hill, this one with the lights on. I knocked on the door, and some old man and his wife answered the door. They welcomed me in immediately and were very inviting. They gave me some hot tea and offered me a spot on the couch. I told them my story about the freaky cabin up the hill, and the two looked at each other, puzzled. The woman confirmed 2 times the cabin I was talking about. Then she said, "Honey, the owner of that cabin was murdered 2 years ago. That cabin has been vacant ever since."
My name is Aiden. I live in rural Vermont with my parents and 2 brothers. One weekend, when my parents were gone, my grandma had us take a little trip over to her house for the weekend. She has money, so she lives on a nice big private property, and she has things for us to do there. It was the closest thing to a vacation that we'd get all summer. I'm the oldest, and I was 15 at the time, so I guess my parents still didn't fully trust us to be left home alone at that time. Me and my younger brother were playing basketball out front until the sun was just starting to set. After that, we went inside and ate dinner. My grandma later called me down from my room because we left the door to the Morton building open. That confused me because we didn't even go into the Morton building. I went downstairs to the dining room window where I could see that the door was in fact open. It was dark out there now, but the light above the door was on and made it easy to see the opening. I called up to my 2 brothers, who both claimed they didn't open it. I expressed concern to my grandma, suggesting maybe somebody had broken in. She overreacted, as she does with everything. I went to the front door and looked out the glass up top, and literally screamed, "Holy shit." My grandma yelled, "What's wrong?" and started freaking out. I told her I saw a man just standing at the bottom step of the front porch. She came over to look for herself and then started yelling to call the cops. I told her I'm gonna go outside and confront him, but she literally would not let me. She would cry and beg me not to open the door, and even tugged at my arm each time I tried to grab the doorknob. I finally agreed to call the cops instead and waited out. My grandma got on the phone, almost crying to the operator, kind of overreacting by stating that somebody is gonna break into our house. I sat in the dining room looking out the window, watching the man. My grandma wouldn't allow my two younger brothers to even come downstairs. The blackness of the man's figure standing out there was the only thing darker than the surrounding ambience. Finally, the man turned and walked past the window I was sitting by, seemingly circling to the back of the house. We tried to follow through the house, watching him through every window possible, until we lost him completely. We were in the den of the house, looking through the back window, but he was nowhere in sight. We had nothing to tell the police when they arrived, other than someone was standing at our front porch. They apparently had been in our Morton building, and they walked around back near the trees and disappeared. Nothing unusual was found in the Morton building, and they couldn't find the man anywhere on the property. They told us to call them back if we see them again, because realistically, there was nothing they could do. My grandma insisted we stay upstairs, and she would sleep down there for the night. Me and my brothers were playing on the GameCube that we brought along upstairs at around 10 o'clock, when we heard my grandmother's heart-chilling scream coming from downstairs. We all panicked and sprinted all the way down to the den, where we saw our grandma pointing into the pitch-black office. She said there was someone in there. I closed the door and told my brothers to help me lean up against it while Grandma once again called the cops. The cops arrived, and to our surprise, found the man laying on our grandma's office couch. He was very open about his intentions, spending the night in the warmth of the house. There were 2 windows that you couldn't exit from in that office, meaning the door we were blocking was the only exit. He admitted he simply entered the house through the den window, which was not locked. My grandma is 92 now. She's always been a skittish, worrisome little thing, but this event only made her that much more paranoid with just about everything. I was vacationing in the Bahamas when I was 14 with some family friends. My friend and I were getting some henna tattoos at the hotel, and there was this guy lingering around us, but we didn't think much of it because a lot of people would stop to see what was going on. After mine was done, I told my friend and her mom I was going to go back to the room to get ready for dinner. There were 2 ways to the other side of the hotel, either inside through a bunch of small stores or outside along the pool. I walked through the inside and got to the elevator, where I saw the guy who had been watching us already at the elevator. We got on together, and he gestured for me to choose my floor button first. I clicked it, but he didn't choose another floor. Alarms start going off in my head. But what could I do? I was stuck in an elevator. The elevator stopped on my floor, and I started walking to my room. In this hotel, most of the rooms faced the ocean, so to the right in this hallway were just windows. I was in the very last room on that floor, and I could see the guy following me about 10 feet behind. About 2 doors from my room, he ran up and grabbed me. I kicked and screamed, and he dropped onto the floor. I ran to the room and locked myself in. After talking with security and giving a description, they found the guy and found out that he had actually been following multiple younger women in the building. It was a few weeks ago. I took a trip with my wife Allison to a top of the mountains resort a few hours from our house. Out of respect for the family-run resort, I won't be mentioning the name. It was a couples weekend, so the itinerary would be heavily catered to adults rather than its usual family orientation. The resort had a very old-fashioned, country-ish feel to it. Everything was built from wood. Our room was huge. It was actually 2 rooms combined to 1, with the door that usually separates the two having been left open. The first night was actually a singles mingle night in the basement club just below the dining hall, even though it was meant to be a couples weekend. So we just played some late night shuffleboarding, conversed with a few other young couples, and drank at the bar for a bit while listening to an amateur musician playing guitar up on the stage. When we got back to our room at around 12:30, there was a rather disgusting smell. A new smell that wasn't there earlier. It smelled kind of skunky. Allison kind of playfully smacked my chest and accused me of smoking pot. However, I assured her I haven't even done so since I was in college. Allison went to the front desk in the main building and requested a different room. They denied the request as most of the rooms were booked, but they did send someone up to our room who agreed it smelled funky in there. The smell was mostly coming from the attached extra room that we weren't sleeping in. He offered us a partial discount to our bill for the inconvenience and sprayed some Febreze from the closet around the room. We took his suggestion to keep the door separating the two rooms closed, as a skunk might have gotten into the other room. We went to sleep shortly after, or at least tried to, as a few minutes after turning out the lights, me and Allison both heard a consistent thud-like sound every few seconds coming from the left of the bed in an adjacent room. We tried to ignore it and just wait it out, hoping it would stop, but it just became too annoying. I was sure it was some kind of rodent making the noise in the next room over. I took a broom as a weapon and went into the connected room. I checked in the closet and under the bed. Nothing. The sound had stopped as well. I was heading back to our main room when I noticed something in the corner. I didn't turn my head fully in fear of what I knew I was going to see. But through my peripheral vision, I saw a very tall, black figure-type object in the corner of the room. After locking the door connecting the two rooms, we once again phoned the front desk, and they immediately sent the owner of the resort up with a gun. The door to the hallway on the other side of the room was open, meaning the thing I saw in the corner was a person, and they made a break for it as soon as I left the room. The owner actually told us that we were smart to call, as there had actually been some creeps coming to the resort, stealing food from the cafeteria and sneaking into people's rooms at night.